The prophecy delivered in the land of the dead does not describe a monster, a storm, or a battle, but a single, silent moment on a foreign shore, a moment that begins with a spear and ends with the sea taking everything. Odysseus is told he will die in old age, surrounded by prosperity, and yet the most ancient sources whisper that his real death was anything but peaceful. The contradiction between the promise of a gentle end and the brutal reality of his final voyage is a wound in the story that has never fully healed, and the truth lies buried in a prophecy that was never meant to be understood literally. To grasp what the blind seer truly saw, we must first abandon the idea that Homer gave us the whole picture, because the underworld revelation was a riddle wrapped in a lie. And the answer changes everything we thought we knew about the king of Ithaca. We all think the prophecy was a reward, a final blessing for a hero who suffered too long. But the reality is that Tiresias offered Odysseus a choice between two deaths, and the version we remember is the one that never happened. The seer spoke of a journey inland, carrying an oar so unfamiliar that a passerby would mistake it for a winnowing fan. And only then, after appeasing Poseidon with a sacrifice, could Odysseus return home and live out his days in peace. This image of a tranquil retirement has charmed readers for millennia, yet it ignores a fundamental problem. Odysseus was never a man who could simply stop. His entire identity was built on cunning, on the thrill of the next horizon, and on the restless hunger that drove him through a decade of wandering. The prophecy assumed he would finally be satisfied, that he would plant his oar in the earth and become a farmer. But that assumption contradicts the very nature of the hero who wept on Calypso's shore, not because he was trapped, but because he was not moving. The emotional heart of this story is not found in the halls of Ithaca, but on the island of Circe, where Odysseus sat in despair, watching the smoke rise from her chimney, while his men wept around him. He had already survived the Seacones, the Lotus Eaters, and the Cyclops, yet he was broken not by danger, but by the weight of a journey that seemed to have no end. When Circe finally told him he must descend into Hades to consult the ghost of Tiresias, Odysseus did not react with courage. He wept, covering his face with his hands, because the thought of sailing to the very edge of the world was more terrifying than any monster. This moment of raw vulnerability is the key to understanding why the prophecy went wrong, because a man who sobbed at the prospect of the underworld was not a man who could ever embrace the quiet life the seer promised. He made the journey, he spoke to the dead, and he returned. But the prophecy planted a seed of expectation that would eventually become his undoing. The most counterintuitive fact about this entire legend is that the prophecy was never actually about preventing Poseidon's wrath, but about measuring Odysseus's capacity for peace, a test he was doomed to fail. Think of it like a doctor telling a lifelong smoker that he will die peacefully in his sleep if he quits tomorrow. The promise is real, but the condition is impossible for the patient to fulfill. Tiresias knew exactly who he was speaking to, a man who had spent 20 years lying, scheming, and fighting, and the blind prophet was essentially offering him a cure that Odysseus had no ability to swallow. The oar that would be mistaken for a winnowing fan was not just a physical object, but a symbol of a life utterly disconnected from the sea, and the prophecy demanded that Odysseus sever his own soul from the source of his identity. Every step he took inland would have been a step away from himself, and the prophecy was clever enough to disguise this impossible demand as a blessing. The lightning burst of truth comes from the ancient poet Lycophron, who recorded a version of Odysseus's end that the Homeric tradition conveniently forgot. In that telling, Odysseus does not die in Ithaca at all, but is killed by his own son Telegonus, the child he fathered with Circe during his year on her island. Telegonus, grown and searching for his father, lands on Ithaca with no knowledge of who rules there, and in the chaos of a raid, he kills the old king with a spear tipped with the spine of a stingray. The prophecy of Tiresias said death would come from the sea, and it did. Not in the form of a wave or a storm, but in the poisoned point of a weapon born from a creature of the ocean. The spear that killed Odysseus was made by the hands of his own forgotten son, and the sea took its revenge not through Poseidon, but through the blood of the hero's own bloodline. The gentle death promised by the seer was a fiction, a polite story to comfort the living, while the real prophecy, the one whispered in the dark, spoke of a poisoned wound and a father who never knew his own child. The irony is that Circe knew the truth, because she was the one who told Odysseus he must seek Tiresias, and she was also the one who later sent Telegonus into the world to find his father. She loved Odysseus, but she also understood that a man who refused to stay with her, who chose a mortal wife over immortality, would never be allowed to simply fade away. The myth of the gentle death was a consolation prize, a narrative constructed to give the Odyssey a satisfying conclusion. But the older tradition, the one that survived in fragmentary poems and obscure commentaries, refused to let the hero off so easily. Odysseus was a man of violence, of cunning, of endless motion, and the cosmos demanded that his end match the chaos of his life. So the true answer to the mystery is that Tiresias did not lie, but he did not tell the whole truth either, because he offered Odysseus a prophecy that could only be fulfilled if the hero became someone he was not. The real death waiting for Odysseus was not the peaceful passing of an old king, but the poisoned sting of a spear wielded by a son he never knew he had, a death that came from the sea in the most literal and brutal way possible. The blind seer saw the future clearly, and what he saw was a man who could not resist the pull of the tide, and a prophecy that would only come true in the shape of a tragedy. If a man is promised peace but his nature is war, then which promise is the real one? The one spoken by the prophet, or the one written in the soul of the hero himself?